Right, good evening, everyone. So I'm David Dawson. I'm going to be giving a short talk about sort of really an update on where we are with plans for the Assize Court. So I'll just share my screen with you and I'll sort of get going. So the talk tonight is sort of an update on one that many of you will have heard, or some of you will have heard at our annual general meeting a month or so ago. But there are a number of things that have changed because stuff keeps happening, if you see what I mean. So, oops. So I'm just getting my screen sorted out. So just a reminder that the project for the Assize Court is a combination. There are two charities working together. There's the Devizes Assize Court Trust, which is a charity which actually owns the building, and us as the Wiltshire Museum, which will occupy and run the building, and we're going to be leading on applying for grants. So that's sort of the basic mechanics. So you'll be familiar with the building. 1835, built as the Assize Court for the town, and as you'll see from this photo, it's been smartened up again recently. The windows have been painted black with white strips of wood put on to make it to smarten it up. So that's the basic position. The inside of the building is, well, it's derelict basically, but the outside of the building has been stabilized, and basically it is not deteriorating much. There's been some more patching done on dubious bits of the roof over the last couple of months, but basically it's solid. So the plans are for the building to become a community hub, a new home for the museum, and to be an anchor part of the development or the regeneration of the wharf. And this is a view of the Purcell our architects have put together when we were sort of kicking the project off, showing you the sort of thing that the building might become. And in 2019, we had grand plans for this was the ground floor for a cafe out the back and exhibition space, and on the first floor in the former magistrate court and in the centre for offices, more galleries, and library and archive looking out over the canal, and to link through to the cellar store. We've also done work on how the building might work and how it might tell stories, particularly the story of the history, archaeology and natural environment of Wiltshire. And we commissioned a company called Image Makers, who came up with these sort of broad ideas of how that would work and how that would work within the space. And something I was particularly fond of is the idea of making a grand statement in the entrance hall. So you see here an artist inspired by the white horses of Wiltshire to create something that, as you walk into that space, you look up and you go, wow. So that's the idea. And then to show off our nationally important designated collections, you see here Bronze Age material, and then also tell the story of the town of Devizes. And I love the idea we came up with of having an aerial photo on the floor so that you can relate to the plan of the town and the buildings in the town. But a key part of what we were working, what we're planning, is to work with the idea of regenerating the wharf area of Devizes. Now, this was kicked off initially a number of years ago, so 6 or 7 years ago, and was looking at regenerating the area of the wharf car park, which is over sort of off to the right-hand side of this slide. But with the announcement by Wadworth that they were going to move production, then Wiltshire Council commissioned a company called New Master Planning to extend that basic plan out to cover the area of the Wadworth development, the Wadworth site, and also linking to the plans that were emerging from us for the Assize Court. So this here are a couple of slides from that wharf development strategy. It's something that was commissioned by Wiltshire Council and is sort of it's not it's not been published by them, so it's not formal planning guidance, but is meant for guidance both for all the organisations involved in regenerating the wharf area. So it's essentially is sort of advice to Wadworths, to anyone they might be working with, and to us on the sort of things that the council will look to see. And this plan is really quite interesting. It shows the connectivity. And so you see the idea of a footpath alongside the canal, which will bring people, much more likely to bring them into the town. Connectivity through the archway under Wadworths through to the canal. And here also into the site. The yellow would be the main sort of vehicle access, is what they were envisaging. And you see how that starts to liven things up. Oh, and with zebra crossings in front of the Assize Court and by the brewery, and these to be pedestrian crossings to encourage people to explore the site. And that was then brought in with a bit more detail. Up in the top left, you see the suggestion that there could be 3 floors, flats, and sort of more than one story rather than houses. And you see here sort of awnings suggesting shops and little shops and so on. And they mapped out an area which they called the brewery courtyard, as this might be quite lively with shops and cafes, linking to the stone wharf, which they saw as much more public open space alongside the canal that people could enjoy. And the white area was the area they saw as being ripe for development, for which they assumed are the flats and houses and everything else that any developer might wish to bring forward. So this sort of outlines the basics of what the council hoped will be developed. Now, in the meantime, things have changed rather since 2019. So our initial plans with Purcell included a basement for storage of the collections. But to do that, to do everything I wanted, would have cost 17 million. That was back in 2019. And so that just wasn't going to work. We made some cuts to the project and came down to something like 12.5 million, a mere nothing. But building inflation will have added to that at least 20%, if not more. And then the other thing is that there's been a change in TAC by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. When we were planning this project, the then Heritage Fund, National Heritage Lottery Fund, HLF, yes, had just awarded 11 million to the Dorset Museum in Dorchester towards a £14 million project. So that was the sort of grant, the size of grant that they were giving at the time. After COVID, they have changed tack and will now only award a maximum of £5 million to a project of our sort of scale. So that all means the need to rethink some plans. And also we did quite a lot of work looking at our audiences, talking to people about the sort of thing they wanted to see in the building, how the community hub would work, how the museum displays would work. But that was all completed in lockdown. And now things are rather different. And also that was before we knew that Wadworths were thinking of relocating their production. So one of the things, the challenges we faced, or one of the challenge, is that the right word, we faced, is thinking about what to do about the collections. Because the current building, the buildings in Long Street, are jam-packed. We've got 2 cellars, 3 attics, 5 stores. All the displays have got cupboards under the cases which are full of stuff. And I had the joy of working out how much shelving we've got in the current building. And that's something like 1.4 kilometers. And that holds everything from archaeological finds through to manuscript and document and periodical collections and library. So a wide range of things. So really, we've got two options for what we can do with the collections. The first is to magic up a brand new building, and the second is to remain on a bit of the Long Street site. So Lisa, our curator, and I sat down and specified what we need for a collections research centre. And you see here flip chart heaven of sort of listing everything that we thought was needed. And if we remain on the current site, then we've a number of things are quite positive. One is that if we choose things, if we do things carefully, it means that when the assize court development happens, we can then maximize the value of the buildings on the site. Also, we can look at minimizing the costs of fitting out or future running and repair costs. But more, and what we came up with was the idea that we could use the back part of the building. So if we go to the plan, that's this area, which is the current lecture room, the Oxman and Piper galleries, and downstairs, this is the main area of the prehistory collections. And we did some sums, and bingo, you can see down there, we could make 1.477 kilometers of shelving. Perfect. Slight problem is that we've been talking to a valuer, and we now think that actually the most sensible thing to do is to keep number 41 Long Street. So that's the area around here. So that's the current Iron Age and medieval galleries, right the way through to the offices. One of the advantages of that is we keep the lift and the toilets, which really will minimize the fit out costs. And we think we can fit within that part of the building. And that will be a collections research centre where researchers will come. Our archaeology field group will be able to work on the finds from their excavations, and we can welcome university and school groups who would be doing more sort of detailed work on the collections. That means we could, when we've done the project, then we can release the rest of the buildings on the site, potentially for housing, to essentially make a bit of money to help go into the endowment fund to keep the museum running, to keep the society running. So that's the plan at the moment. But the key thing is that we don't need to make any concrete decisions yet. We've got a number of years before we need to really take any decision. But the key thing is we've got a good story to tell the National Lottery Heritage Fund, that we aren't going to move, we don't have to move the collections. We have a number of options on the current site, and that there is, most importantly, there is no risk to the project. It's not as though we're sort of hoping that something will appear out of nowhere. We are in control of this building, and we can decide how we're going to use it, which means that we can make it happen, and we can fund it by selling off part of the existing site. So the Heritage Fund are prioritised two things. One is audiences, particularly the people who buy lottery tickets. And the second is to make sure that there is as little risk as possible in the delivery of any project. So the idea is to de-risk the future of the collections by making sure they're going to be safeguarded for the future. And now on to our plans for the Assize Court itself. So I showed you this slide earlier about how this was the sort of thing we had in mind when we started off the project, and how we can't afford to do everything we want, to put it mildly. So what we've had to do is go back to this slide again. So building cost inflation and the maximum award from the Heritage Fund of 5 million means that we've got to think again. And we asked Purcell to go back and think again in terms of what the bare minimum we could get away with. And they came up with 4 options. So I'm going to show you a couple. So this is option 2, because we can't afford option one. And the way this works is that as you enter the building, again, we've got the orientation, welcome and shop as before, learning space in the room on the front left, lecture or gallery space on the ground floor of the former Assize court. And they've suggested putting the cafe here in the room front right. Now, those of us who live in Devizes know that this is linking, this is fronting onto Northgate Street, and the idea of being able to sit out in front of Northgate Street is a non-starter. So we'd have to think about that again. And then a gallery on the ground floor of the former Magistrates Court. And then out the back, just building a staircase and lift, giving access to the upper floors, which would then link through it, bring a gallery into the space of the entrance hall at first floor level, with additional gallery space, offices, and then a gallery above on the first floor of the former Assize court. So that's one possibility. And then we've come up with another, which is we've called option 3 and a bit, which is sort of similar but different. The difference here is that rather than having stairs and a lift out the back, we have them in the 2 courtrooms. It may sound bonkers that having one lift is more expensive than having 2 lifts. And the reason is that the lifts here are the cheaper type of platform lift, like we have in the museum at the moment. And those are relatively cheap. It would the notional cost is £25,000 each, rather than something like 125 or 150 for the more robust lift you saw in the previous slide. Again, however, what we've done is put the cafe not in the gallery at the front, but put it at the back of the entrance hall, and looking at roofing over or tenting over in a very a lightweight fashion, a space between the 2 courts to hold the cafe. Those of you who know the Parade Cinema in Marlborough will have seen the huge marquee that they've put up and are using to provide extra space for people to enjoy their cafe even during the winter. It was very successful in the summer, and they're now doing it over the winter as well. So there's a good sort of model for how that might work. And then on the first floor, we have gallery space, meeting rooms, and staff spaces. So that's sort of where we got to. Those as a couple of ideas as how we might make it work. But as you can gather, we've got a whole series of competing priorities and compromises to make. So there's, I think we have to have, I think, a dedicated learning space. One of the real problems with using the current building is that we've got our wonderful lecture room, but we're using it for school groups, lectures, conferences, meetings, and so on. So just as an example, tomorrow we have, during the day, we've got a school in, and then in the evening, we've got a group who are hiring it. And that means changing the room configuration completely, moving out 8 tables and bringing in 50 odd chairs. And that's being done by my colleagues because I'm not there tomorrow. So that sort of constant moving of furniture in and out, often 2, sometimes 3 times a day, is really time consuming and really it's a really bad compromise. And we also have to turn down schools because we have a meeting already booked or an event booked or something like that. So it really does constrain what we can do. We've got to make sure we've got enough community space. I've talked about the cafe. The initial ideas, we were thinking of it looking out towards the canal and being really inviting, looking out towards the canal. We can't afford to have something that really is sort of permanent, if you like, out the back. We can have something, but it's not going to be the same scale. And then the type of catering we offer. rather than being sort of full-blown catering 3-course meal, I suspect it's going to be coffee and a sandwich, coffee and cake, rather than full-blown catering. And the cells, this is one of the really difficult compromises. Getting lift access down to the cells under the main magistrates court is beyond our budget, because of it's not just the lift itself, as I said, which is 150,000. We'd have to dig down into the space between the two courtrooms, create a new basement, tank that out to stop water penetration. That starts to get really expensive and is more than we can afford. We won't have the space for a changing places toilet. The specification here is a changing places toilet isn't just level access for people who have mobility problems. This is where this has facilities like a shower and a hoist, so that adults can be with learning difficulties can be changed and showered. So it really is making something a real benefit to the community, but we don't have the space for that. And then we're going to have to floor in some of the extra spaces. We could have floored in the entrance hall, but we think that's a real problem doing that. In theory, we could put a mezzanine floor in that room on the front right, but in fact the ceiling spaces aren't high enough, and we're going to have to floor in number 1 court, the assize court. We're going to have to put a first floor in that, which is something we didn't want to do, but I think we have no options. However, if we do one of those relatively lightweight plans, then we have the ability to add over time something like lift access to the cells, cafe, community space, basement store, library and archive research spaces are all things that can come later. And we could do that potentially in 2 phases, adding the lift, sort of improving the lift access and cafe as phase 1, and then a basement store and improved library and archive research spaces as then a phase beyond that. So the whole thing could become then not just actually a 3-phase project. So number 1, conversion basically of the current historic site, the historic building, then adding a building in the middle for with lift access to the cells and so on. And then phase 3 would be basement store, library and archive research space out the back. So that's sort of where we've got to at the moment. And then how we make it happen. We've been successful. We've been invited to submit an application to the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and we are now working towards a submission date of the 23rd of February for that. What you see here is a list of all the documents that we need to provide. And you think that sort of putting in a grant application sounds pretty straightforward, but what we're doing here is anything up to 500 pages of detailed application. And just to give you a clue, you see down there is a job descriptions. Now that's not the way the Heritage Fund work is you go through 2 different stages, but those job descriptions aren't just for while we sort of do more development work on the project, or while the building work goes on and the fit out of the building. We actually have to provide the job descriptions for the people who will be working the building once it's open. So it's not just saying what the job, saying what the jobs are, but it's actually a job description of what they will do. And we have to provide a risk register for each of the stages of the project, and the list goes on and on. 500 pages. What joy. Now, Nicola Trow, my colleague, has done this amazing spreadsheet showing how we are going about preparing that grant bid. And these are all the documents and at what point they're being done. This is the chart as of earlier last month. We are now with about 80% of the documents are basically prepared. So plenty still to do, but we're well on the way. And one of the things we've been working on is a vision and mission for the project. Because what we've got to be able to do is crystallize what we want to achieve, and also give the words to anyone who comes across someone with lots of money in a lift and can ambush them and say, what we're going to do with our project is, this is why you've got to give us the money. And so you see there the project vision, mission, and of what we're going to achieve. Some of this, as you'll recognize, is language that perhaps ordinary people don't use, but this is the sort of buzzwords that we need to convince the National Lottery Heritage Fund that we're serious. We want to involve new audiences, and we have an amazing story to tell. The obvious question then is, when's it all going to happen? When's it going to open? When will the scaffolding go up? I wish there was an easy answer to that, but unless anyone here has 12 million quid to spare, then the timescales are set by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And the reason for that is that if other funders look to the National Lottery Heritage Fund, they know that they have gone through, before they fund a project, they know they will have gone through it with a fine-tooth comb. They've looked at all the aspects and made sure that the project is viable and will work, and the risk is being taken out of it. So we've got a tick because we got the expression of interest. We are now working on this development phase bid, which is due in February 2023. Then we get a result on that in spring 2023. Actually, it's in June. I should have put that in. June 23 next year. And then we have 2 years to submit a bid to actually do the project. The development phase will be for about $500,000. And that will essentially get us to the point where we have ready to apply for planning permission, and we've got everything ready for if and when they give us the rest of the money, we can then just go straight ahead. Essentially, all the tenders are written, everything's ready to go when they press the button. So the stage 2 bid would go in spring 2025. That takes about 5 to 6 months to process. So we'd get a result in autumn 25. By the time we then got contracts in place and appointed contractors, then we're looking at summer 26 for construction work to start, an 18-month construction phase, and then we have to fit the building out, install displays and so on. So we're looking at 2029, possibly 2030 before we can do it. If anyone can find us 12 million quid, then we could be we could bring that forward by 3 years at least. But other funders look to the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and they're not going to put their funding in unless the Heritage Fund have. So it's only at that point that we can really start to fundraise in earnest. So I hope that's given an overview of where we are at the moment. But what I'm now going to do is come and talk about what's happening in Devizes at the moment, because there's a whole series of quite interesting things that are underway. And I just realized I ought to have, before I do anything else, I ought to mention, of course, the railway station. So you may know that the main line that runs from London Paddington through Newbury to Hungerford, Bedwin, Westbury, and then on down to Exeter, passes on very close to the town, actually, only just under 2 miles outside the town, on the road to Upavon. And the Department for Transport have awarded a consortium of £400,000 to do a feasibility study on putting a railway station on basically just off the Upavon Road. So that's going ahead. And if we're lucky, we'll have a railway station in 5 or 6 years' time. The £400,000 is for that planning work, not for the construction, which I think is down to be about 3 million or something like that. So if that comes off, then that is going to start to change the town quite considerably. But in the meantime, there's all sorts of things going on. On the corner of the corner opposite Wadworth's, the Gagers have succeeded in getting planning permission to build a series of houses. These are the plans and views that were approved, and you see them here. And construction has started. So this is a photo of a couple of weeks ago, but they're on site. Foundations are in, it's really going gung-ho. So that is going to clear up or clean up, tidy up that corner. No longer will it be just a rather ratty looking car park. It'll be housing development. And then the hospital site, of course, you will, if you're in Devizes, you'll know that the new hospital or the urgent care centre on Green Lane is well under construction, is nearing completion. As a result, the NHS has put forward these plans for new housing on the site of the current community hospital, which of course will be relocated as soon as the new building is ready. And so this is, there was a public consultation a couple of weeks ago, a whole series of houses, and then flats. So just to orientate you, this is the canal going through at the top. This is the Kennet and Avon Canal Trust building. And here, these will be flats, houses. This is the former nurses' home, can be converted into flats. And the older buildings here will also become houses and flats and things. So that's coming forward for development as outlined in the Wiltshire Council Wharf Development Strategy done a few years ago, sort of very much in line with that. Another bit of development is on the bottom end of Long Street. So just so you know where you are, this is Long Street here, leading to the Potton Road. This is the roundabout at the bottom end of Long Street. Up here, this is Pans Lane, round to the fire station, just up there, and this is Pans Lane. So these are the NHS offices, which are now what's the word? They're basically empty, so they're not being used anymore. And there's plans have just been announced to convert the main building to flats and then to build new houses on other parts of the site. But rather, this is the line of the old railway, but they're very keen to keep this area in particular as public open space in the bit of patch of woodland there. And then turning to Wadworth's, as many of you will know, they're going to relocate production to the former Selector Book warehouse just off the London Road. With this view, you can see the barracks here and the garage, which is just opposite them. This is the building just behind on the road out towards Roundway. This is the building as it was. This is the Smart Artist's impression. And that is very much, that's now more or less complete. The new brewing kit has arrived from Germany, and after Christmas, there's a team are going to start bolting it together. Apparently it's a bit like Lego, and the Wadworths hope to be brewing on the new site in the spring at some point. So that really is progressing well. What that means is that the current Wadworth site is being released for development. And there's a consultation being held at the town hall tomorrow, where the plans of that have been developed by Backhouse, which are the developer working with Wadworth, they're going to be put out for public consultation. There's going to be, and there's a website that'll be launched as well, with a deadline, I think, of mid-January. Now, I've met with Toby Bartholomew, the boss of Wadworth, and also a representative from Backhouse, who are the developers. Backhouse are a company based in Chippenham, and they've done a series of housing developments across Wiltshire. I've driven past one in Highworth, and then they're a cut above your above the average developer. The houses they build are very much low or zero carbon. They'll be using air source heat pumps. There'll be charging facilities for electric cars, well insulated. They are good quality builders. So the area that they're going to be looking at, it's when you look at the area from Google, an aerial photo, you realize quite how large the Wadworth site is. So the Wadworths, this is the brewery corner, the archway here leading through to the backyard, but their site comes all the way down here to what was called the White Lion, the former training pub. Comes up here to their cellar store building that's here, and around here down to the canal, across to there, up to the far side of Anstey Court, along here, and then linking up with the Wharf car park just there. This is the back of the Crown, then along here to the back of the car wash, and then back down to New Park Street. So I've seen a very early version of these plans, but I'm not quite sure what's going to be shown at the presentation tomorrow, so well worth going. But on the website, they've shown some images of what the development might look like. So these are computer-generated visuals of, as you can see, Brewery Wharf. Quite where this is on the site, I don't really know. But this one is fairly obvious because you can see here the ghostly shadow at the top of the brewery building. So this is back down somewhere near the cellar store building, just outside the back of the Assize Court. And you can see here, along with the previous one, the idea of there being flats as outlined in the council's wharf development strategy. And here's another one. And you see the chap sitting down there, I suspect looks a bit like me, but isn't honest. And you have here a series of flats. I assume that these roofs have solar panels on. These certainly do. And you see there's a series of houses along here. So it's going to be a mixed development of flats and houses. And then somewhere to sit out with a glass of wine. So as I say, quite how these work with the site, I'm not quite sure, but if you're interested, you can go down to the town hall tomorrow between 3 and 7 and meet the developer and have a chat with them. There's going to be a website which will be open for consultation, which we'll post to our social media. But you should see that if you Google Backhouse Development or something like that, you'll be able to find it in due course. I think that will get launched tomorrow. We looked earlier today and it's not up yet. So one of the things, clearly, we've already had some early discussions with Wadworth and developer, but very clearly the obvious thing will be to see how their plans work with what the council essentially was recommending in the wharf development strategy, and particularly how the back of the Assize Court development will work, how that will link with whatever Wadworth planned to do with the historic part of the brewery, and this idea of public realm alongside the canal, and what we can do with the back, essentially the back garden of the Assize Court at the moment. As I say, we perhaps a phase 3 is to have a new building on there, but in the meantime, this could be really quite a lively space. Nicola's very keen on the idea of being able to bring a pizza van in, but we can have things like a playground, reconstructed buildings, sculpture park. You know, your imagination just starts to run away with what we could do with a really usable open space and public realm. It could be real fun. So that's going to be the interesting thing, is to see how this the archway under the brewery links with a view to the marketplace, and how it will bring people down here to explore this area. and to spend their money in the shops, and of course visit the museum and use our community spaces. So that's everything I wanted to say. There's probably a few things I've forgotten, but I think from here I'll hand over to you and see if there's any questions anyone would like to ask. So if you click on the Q&A button and type in your question, then I'll have a go at trying to answer it. Unless nobody wants to ask any questions. So deathly silence at the moment. So Laurie has just said, how important will the library be in the new development? One of the things we've had to do is to decide to leave the library on the current site. And I was explaining how the initial idea would be that we'd move the library and archive to the back of the building, into the area that's currently the lecture room, the Oxford Gallery, the prehistory galleries. That was the initial idea, but and I saw the lecture room as being essentially the library space. But I think at the moment the favourite is to move is actually to use number 41. That's the Georgian townhouse by the turning down to the Ark and the car park, and to put the library in there somewhere. Quite where we haven't worked out, but that will be the idea. So we would keep the library and the archive and the collections together with the objects in the collection store. Not perfect, but we think that's the least worst option at the moment. So Maggie has said, thanks for a great presentation. Well, thank you. How do you view the future museum? I mean, how would it complement those at Stonehenge and Dorchester? Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things that strikes me is that the idea of a train station at Devizes really opens up a whole new sort of set of possibilities. Because at the moment, if you want to visit Avebury, the easy way to do that by public transport, and remember that we need to be encouraging people to use public transport, is to catch a train to Swindon. Those of you who ever used that line know how expensive that is, and then catch the bus from from Swindon to Avebury, and then very few people then go from Avebury down to Devizes. Now, if we can attract people to the new train station at Devizes, they can pick up a rerouted 49 bus to get to Avebury, visit the museum, and then catch a bus down to Stonehenge. That creates a whole different way of approaching Stonehenge and Avebury, and linking the two, and reinforcing the museum as being the linchpin between the two halves of the World Heritage Site. Obviously, our friends in Salisbury may wish to differ on that, but it does open up a different way of approaching the World Heritage Site. Nick has said, what interpretation of the Assize Court history will you incorporate into the build? Good question, and at the moment I'm not quite sure, because the idea originally was to concentrate that in the former cells, and also to use AV, to use projections and technology to tell the story of the Assize Court in the Assize Court space when it wasn't being used for other things. Quite where we'll do that at the moment, I don't know. One of my little jobs is to start to think about how we will use the new spaces I've talked about in different ways. So at the moment, my favorite is still to use the room on the front right as the place where we tell the story of Devizes, and then we would use that to tell the story of the court. Another option is to use the gallery of the the jury box, the grand jury box, and to use that in some way, perhaps have an AV show in there telling the story of justice and injustice. But we have to tell that story within the building because that is so important. And Philip has said, how does the proposed gallery space in the Assize Court compare with the floor space of the galleries in the present building? I haven't done the sums in detail. We've only had those revised plans for a couple of weeks, but it's going to be about the same or slightly more. But I think the key is that a lot of the space in the current building is tied up in circulation space because they are small domestic spaces and we have to get people around the building. And of course, everyone always gets lost. So we may not have a great deal of extra space, but we have a heck of a lot more usable space, which I think is really quite important. Thomas said, where will we install the Piper window? Good question. And the Piper window will definitely be coming with us. Yeah, I don't know at the moment. That is something we'll work on, but it will definitely come with us, and it will definitely have pride of place. You can be sure of that. And actually, that's a really good reminder, which is that we open the Oxman exhibition on Saturday. So that's the Oxman competition. You can all come and see the winning entries, but also during the while we had the Hardy exhibition on, many of you will know we took out the Piper window and had it conserved and cleaned, and it's now back in pride of place, and it's backlit with an LED light, and it looks absolutely stunning. So you must come and see it. It really is something we're so proud of and pleased to be able to show off. And Tony and Zita said, what's being proposed to tidy the side of the canal to give an attractive but safe view from the back from the cafe? I have no idea at the moment, but that's where Wiltshire Council will come in, because they will I'm sure that as part of their discussions with the developer, they will see how the canal side can be tidied up. Most of the canal side belongs to Wadworth, even though it's in front of what was the forge that used to belong to John Girvan. There's an unanswered question as well, which is, will the canoe club stay where it is, which I assume it will, but there's scope for all sorts of things to happen. So that's the sort of thing that will emerge as the developer that's working with Wadworth, that was Backhouse, bring forward their plans and get into more detailed discussions with the council. We'll find out more later. At the moment, it's very much broad brush approach. And something I've realized I've forgotten to do, which is to highlight that we've just completed an amazing oral history project, which is interviewed a whole series of people who used the court in its heyday and remember it. And it's an oral history project, so we've recorded their stories, and there's a brilliant little publication out telling the story of how the court was used. That's on sale in the museum shop for just under £5, £4.99, I think, and that's available through the website as well. I'm sorry, I should have put up the screen grab of that. And there are some banners. There's a banner going up on the Assize Court, and we'll have some display boards in the foyer of the cinema, which, when I last heard, is due to open sometime around Easter. So people will be able to find out a lot more about the story of the Assize Court, which would be great. So is there oh yes, so another 2 questions. So Maggie has said, are there any areas where you're needing help for getting the project off the ground, or are you resourced in this area? At the moment, we're full steam ahead on the bid. So we've got, I'm I'm working with Nicola, my colleague, and Colin Johns, who's the consultant architect for the Devizes Assize Court, and then with our colleagues and the trustees of both the Assize Court Trust and the Wiltshire Museum. And we've got a wide range of people with different skills involved in that. So at the moment, we're probably okay. But once we hit the next stage, which is when we hear the result back from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, at that point we need to then kick into gear, because we will be doing things like asking people to give their views on how we develop the plans for the building. We'll be running activities to engage with the audiences we're going to try and reach that don't use the museum at the moment, and there'll be all sorts of ways that we'll be asking people to get involved. So I hope that's answered your question, Maggie. If you have a specific skill, like being able to extract 12 million pounds out of people, I would also be delighted to hear as well, because that's something that is going to be critical. We do have a professional fundraiser who's advising us, and one of the members of the DACT board has extensive fundraising experience. So we sort of are very much working on that. Susan said, would it be possible to put images of the current state of the building, cells, dock, etc. on your website or on social media? There are a whole series of photos on the Assize Court website. So if you'll give me a moment, I'll call that up. Maggie, was that you volunteering to raise 12 million pounds for us? It would be rather nice if it was. I'll just call up the Assize Court Trust website and show you so that you can see where to go, if you see what I mean. So, sorry, I've just got to crane my neck around my laptop to get the right one. So hopefully you can see the Assize Court Trust website here. If you go to, so that's devisesassizecourt.org.uk. If you go to the building, you've got how it looks now. Wait for it to come in. And so you have a number of pictures of the outside, as it was a little while ago. It's been smartened up since, or bits of it have. And then below, the interior. That's the public gallery, or what's left of it, the entrance there to the public gallery. This is the room on the right-hand side that will be the Story of Devizes gallery. That's the ceiling of the main Assize Court. What will become the learning centre. That's the public gallery in the main Assize Court. And that's the jury box of the Assize Court. And this is the entrance hall. So as you can see, it's rather a mess. So I'm just catching up. Also, I see there's a few people putting things into the chat. So they're saying thank you, David. Yeah. Oh, Ian pointing out, yes, how long the funding horizon is. Yeah, if anyone can find me 19 million, then we could put it all in one place. But I think that it will become something that the town can be, and we at the museum and society can be really proud of. So I think that's it for questions, unless anyone has got a last one. So in which case I'll say thank you very much for joining. Remember that if you're in Devizes tomorrow, you can pop down and see the exhibition about the plans that Wadworth have putting together. That's open between 3 and 7. That's in the town hall, in the cheese hall on the ground floor. There is a website. There'll be a consultation website that we'll highlight through our social media, that you can take a look and see what they're planning. So with that, thank you very much, everyone. I hope you've found that vaguely interesting, and please stick with us and support us, because we are in this for the long haul, and it's going to be a very long haul thanks to the various changes that have happened over the last couple of years. Wish it wasn't that way, but we've got to make this work, both for the Assize Court building and to secure the future of the museum. Thanks, everyone. Bye.